Misty, the last sentencing that I heard that was this dramatic, and you and I were talking about it, was the one of Larry Nassar.
Yes.
Right? The one where you have sort of multiple victims, obviously very different crimes, very different circumstance. But when you see sort of just the level, the ripple effects on so many different families, I have to think that the judge is going to take that into consideration in some way.
Absolutely. When you're talking about specifically, let's talk about the two roommates who not only talked about the trauma that they experienced, saying, why did I get to be the one to live, and having to double lock doors and stay in the bedroom with their parents, and just having to live through that experience and everything that's happened after the fact. This is not something that is done in a day. This is trauma that they'll live with for the rest of their lives. So, of course, the judge is going to take all of that into consideration. And I think Danny brought up a great point. You know, there's no real world where you get motive. Sometimes prosecutors present it, they don't have to. But the family wants to know. And
because the seeming randomness of it is part of what is so chilling about this case, right? Everybody thinks about sending their kids to college. Everyone thinks about sending their loved ones off the first time they're really on their own. It's every parent's worst nightmare.
Absolutely. It's stranger on stranger, quadruple murder. It just does not make sense. So obviously the families want to know. And something I think about Olivia and her statement that she made and what she brought up, I do think she's hitting him where it hurts. And I agree with Danny.
The ego.
The ego, because I agree with Danny that the advice would be don't speak. There's actually no incentive to do so. Sometimes in a sentencing hearing, you do hear from the defendant, and often it's because they're looking for some degree of humanizing themselves or talking about how they could be rehabilitated.
Some acceptance of responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's generally because it could impact their sentence. Here, we expect it to be life times 4 without the possibility of parole. So what would be the incentive to actually speak? There truly isn't one, unless you hit someone in that ego. And exactly what we were talking about when you look at the profile of this type of person, and I think Olivia said, you're a sociopath. If you think that you committed the perfect crime because you're a criminology student, look at where you are right now. And again, that aspect of notoriety. And so that, to me, was maybe crack the door open. Is that enough to get him, when he has the opportunity to make his decision on his own, to speak to the court? Would that be enough? I agree with Danny, unlikely, but maybe more of a chance than we thought coming into this hearing today.
Well, and in some ways, this is sort of an unusual situation. Obviously, plea deals happen every day all the way across America. In fact, plea deals happen probably more frequently than not. But since we know what the plea is, the judge really has his hands tied in a certain way, right? He's not going to give him the death penalty now that they've agreed on the life sentences. He's not going to give him anything less than life. And I wonder if somehow since it's all sort of baked in a pre-situation like this with a pre-agreement, whether that sort of limits how far the judge is going to go. In a typical circumstance, right, where we don't know what the sentence is going to be, the judge has to lay out, right, all of his reasons why, what are the mitigating circumstances, what was the childhood like, what happened to the victims. Here, there's less for the judge to really do in a certain way, but doesn't mean he's not going to have something to say.
Absolutely. I think he will say something, and he'll have to say something, because even though the defense and prosecution have agreed on what the sentence should be, the judge ultimately has the final say. So there is judicial discretion, and he's going to want justification on the record. To your point, Laura, this is a unique set of circumstances where that justification could simply be that there is no hope for rehabilitation given the circumstances, that there's deterrence, general deterrence for these types of crimes. When you look at the pillars of the criminal justice system, that's what we look at. And justifying a life sentence without the possibility of parole, waiver of appeal, all of the terms that we know are going to come to fruition when this hearing is over. But how far will the judge go? Because the judge does have ultimately discretion about what he will say about this case. He cannot ask the defendant to give us any further information. Defendant still has that right to remain silent, can't ask about motive, can't ask any of those burning questions. But we know the judge, from the reporting, was tearing up. Yeah. Will he speak about the emotional impact that we've heard today in the courtroom on these families, the unspeakable crime that he has now pled guilty to and admitted that he committed these murders?
All right, looks like they're back on the bench here with Xana Kernodle's family. Let's listen in.